Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar Integrity and Use of Human Financial Resources in Education, a cross-country synthesis of findings from Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, and Mongolia. My name is Raffaella from the Network of Education Policy Centers, and we are pleased to host today Mihailo Milovanovic from the Center of Applied Policy and Integrity, NEPC Bulgarian member. Hi, Mihailo, welcome and thank you for joining us. Hello. Mihailo is the author of the report that will be presented today, together with Olja Jovanovic from the University of Belgrade. This report is the result of a project founded by Open Society Foundations, led by CAPI and NEPC in cooperation with 4 project partners from the network members. The Education Policy Planning and Management from Georgia, the Institute for Education Policy Planning and Management from Georgia, the Foundation Education Initiative Support from Kyrgyzstan, the Educational Center PRO DIDACTICA from Moldova, and the Mongolian Education Alliance from Mongolia. Integrity in education system is not a completely new topic in the network. We have managed in the last few years to analyze it from different angles. What we found very interesting in this approach was that we somehow managed to deconstruct the integrity issues practices and to connect them to the issue of inclusive education and position of vulnerable groups in education. So somehow it was a very interesting learning process that will help us in the future to better plan our policy recommendation to support the transparency of education systems. Today among the audience we'll have also the researchers that conducted the researchers at the national level, so maybe we will have also the chance to hear from their perspectives. While Mihailo is putting the presentation on, I also have 2 more housekeeping notes. The first one is that during the presentation, we kindly ask to keep your microphone off so that we are not, we don't hear your background noises. And if you have any questions, comments during the presentation, you can share them in the chat. You have a little icon of the chat on the top right of your screen. So thank you all for joining us. Looking forward for presentation and for your comments and questions. Mihailo, the floor is yours. After the presentation, we will have space to address all of them. Thank you. Mihailo, your microphone is off. Switch it on.
Okay, now it should be working.
Okay, now it should work. Yeah. You can share your screen now.
The first test, I managed to find the right button. Okay. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. This report is kind of the final outcome of the work of actually many people. So we had sort of the pleasure and sometimes the challenge, of course, because it's a complex matter, but mostly the pleasure to put it all together based on the work of our colleagues in the countries. And of course, the report itself has many details. So one of the challenges with this presentation is definitely how do you say everything in half an hour, but at the same time, maybe the hope is that I'll speak less than half an hour so that we in fact have some time to talk, because the idea behind, and this was also something that we always had in mind as a primary purpose of this work when we started a long time ago, perhaps 10 years ago, was that we want to somehow analyze education from the point of view of integrity in view of providing some kind of ideas of what can be done, what can be done by people who are responsible for education, either as decision makers or as practitioners or as kind of stakeholders, parents, students, or civil society. And this is why this project that that NEPC and the center did was so interesting, because we in fact handed over all of these instruments that were developed over the past years to civil society organizations, members of NEPS from the 4 countries covered in this research, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, and Mongolia, so that they can do it on their own. So this report is just a summary or a perspective on their findings. And this way of implementing the integrity approach that by civil society organizations themselves, this is actually in some way a first. We always had involvement in civil society and sometimes strong partnerships, but this was like the first time when this was really led by organizations from the countries. So this is like a little bit the background, and what we actually wanted to know were 2 things. And of course, you can wonder why exactly these 4 countries and not other countries. And the reason why we chosen these countries was that first, they are all at the stage where there's really a high level of awareness around corruption and education. There is a demand for action. There are also a lot of actions already taking place. So the point in time appeared to be quite fortunate for this kind of work. The second reason is because in all of these countries, they're at the stage where large-scale long-term reforms were already being implemented for a while. Another wave of reforms was being planned. So it was a good point in time to see whether this integrity angle will somehow provide new insights on how well things worked, what is still an unaddressed problem, and what could be perhaps done better. And of course, there was also the curiosity of, okay, let's try to collect evidence and see what this new approach can actually deliver. So all of these led us to these 4 countries, and we really wanted to know essentially the answer to 2 questions which might appear simple. First, are education participants in these countries engaging in practices that we don't want to have, like integrity violations, which specifically lead to the abuse of human and financial resources? This was the one question. And you see, we covered these questions separately. So we focused on human resources in Georgia and Moldova, and we focused on financial resources in Kyrgyzstan and Mongolia. And of course, once we established that, yes, there are things happening that perhaps should not be happening, the other question was, you know, why? Or how does that happen? What kind of mechanisms are there for these violations to take place? Are there any kind of vulnerabilities in the ways the education systems are set up and operate, which can be addressed, which contribute or facilitate these things? So the way we went about it, we had several stages. Obviously, it's a project that took definitely some time because of all the countries involved, all the partners involved, and the need to somehow be rather careful in the choice of messages we send, so that we say just the right amount of things and not go beyond what the evidence is saying. But essentially, we had several stages. We handed over, so to speak, the methodology and had this full-scale training on integrity assessments in September. We had then the desk research phase, identification of stakeholders in the countries, organizing the process, and so on. We had then a second capacity building coordination meeting in February. The national reports were then finalized in March and May. And then in June, September this year, we finalized the synthesis report, and now we have the stage in which we are disseminating the results. So all in all, it took some time, but we hope that it's time well invested. Just a word about the methodology, not so much because we want to get lost in some kind of a conceptual, philosophical, or research design discussions here, but just in order to give those who may be not familiar with this a better idea of what kind of results one could expect from this work and what kind of results are presented in the report. The idea is that we put really the education participant at the center. Education participant could be different people. It could be a parent, a student, a teacher, a principal, a decision maker, and so on. We put the education participant in the center, and we see, okay, are there any expectations that this person has, and does the education system deliver to these expectations? And if not, if there are some adverse circumstances, what are the vulnerabilities? What are the problems in education which create these circumstances in ways where this education participant starts to think, well, if I wait for things to happen in the ordinary way, they will not happen, so I must do something else, something that perhaps is not entirely permissible, something that's problematic from integrity point of view, and so on, so on. So we're essentially looking into these 2 things. first, what kind of conduct is taking place, so what the education participants do, and second, why do they do that? So what provides them with an opportunity and with a reason to do, and by looking for these kind of factors, we look into the vulnerabilities in education policy and practice. Now, this research in the report has kind of two building stones. One, obviously, we rely on what was collected on national level, and here we have several stages which went through the desk and research. Then we had a stage of collection of primary evidence through focus groups and applying dynamic storytelling techniques. And then we had an in-depth follow-up where it was necessary in the form of semi-structured interviews in each country. When it comes to the kind of a sample, or whom did we actually talk to, the total size of the sample across countries was approximately 220. Well, I say 224, but whether there is really exactly 224 or maybe 221 and a half or 226, I'm not entirely sure, because of course when you have this kind of discussion, sometimes people come and go, but we have around 220 plus counterparts. And of course the number and role of education participants in the different countries, there's a large variation, which largely was determined by the policy area which was covered. For example, in Georgia and Moldova, where we covered integrity in the management of human resources, most of the counterparts were actually teachers and principals, while in Kyrgyzstan and Mongolia, where we discussed parental contributions, we had quite a lot of parents involved. So regarding the synthesis, we did the following. We then tried to identify, okay, what kind of messages do we want to send? So we did several rounds of scanning of the national reports, and we of course detected or identified what are the messages which are specific to each country. But then the synthesis really focuses on two other groups of messages, trying to see what kind of the common findings for each of the topics, both for the integrity of human resource use and for the integrity of the use of financial resources. And then on the third level, we kind of trying to identify what are the joint findings which perhaps hold across the board of countries. And this is also reflected in the structure of the report. You probably have seen or will see soon enough a link where you can actually see the report. We have obviously a chapter where we have the introduction, and then we have this level 2 messages, findings by country and integrity violation, where we grouped in two major groups: human resources, abuse of human resources in education, and then abuse of financial resources. And then in the chapter 3, we have this kind of a synthesis of findings. What is important to say is also that this synthesis report is not a full summary of national findings. It is a presents a secondary analysis of findings, and what we as external observers see, or what we have thought merits to be highlighted in the synthesis report, might not be the same that what national researchers would have highlighted. So it's really a certain perspective of things. So this is not a summary of the summary. It's a selection of key findings which we thought important. And now, after this somewhat too long introduction, perhaps, just to say what we exactly found, what we did. So in this kind of approach, the INTES approach, we have 9 types of violation, 9 types of actions, which seem to hold across the board of countries. So they might have different manifestations in different places. So in this report, we focused on 2. So when we talk about abuse of human resources, the form in which we discuss this, the angle is favoritism. Here's a definition of favoritism. You can read it. I'm not going to read it out, but essentially it's about redistribution of public resources in the forms of employment contracts, promotions, benefits, and so on and so on. And the second violation of the list of 6 here is misappropriation of funds in education, which is, essentially we're talking about the embezzlement of funds in education by someone who is entrusted with their management and control, but who does not own these resources. Now, the presentation further has the same kind of a pattern. For each of these violations, we have first a description of what are the manifestations, so what exactly is happening. in the countries, and then we've discussed a little bit the vulnerabilities. So when it comes to favoritism, in Moldova and Georgia, this is where we covered this violation. It seems that favoritism seems to be really most prevalent at the point of entry to the teaching profession, but we also have some evidence that favoritism may also be targeting or benefiting some teachers who are already in the profession. And it's kind of interesting to see that really this kind of most ordinary, if you wish, almost the first idea, the first example that comes to mind when talking about favoritism, which is like, you know, you pay a bribe and then you get a job, indeed seems to be quite common in both countries. Not over. For example, we had a discussion that this kind of bribing in exchange for appointments might be more prevalent in certain regions of Georgia, not in the entire country, whereas in Moldova, it may be more prevalent in some types of school and not in others. But essentially, it's still a very common violation. And you see, we've just extracted some typical quotes from stakeholders who tell us about that. It is essentially that in cities you might pay money for getting a position of a teacher, while in rural areas you might be using non-monetary compensation. So this is like an interesting quote, which shows that, you know, there really are variances in the way this takes place, and also there are country-specific things that needs to be taken into consideration. The other typical manifestation that we also came across, which is also in the national reports, obviously, is this intentional disregard for qualification requirements. We'll discuss about the reasons of why this is happening, but it's also a form of favoritism, because essentially when qualification requirements are being disregarded, this could be because of very justifiable reasons, like, okay, there are no other candidates, so we take whoever is there. We'll discuss this in the next slide, but quite often it is because you just want to employ somebody who, for some reason, is close to you as a principal. We have, for example, these very nice and somewhat troubling quotes from Moldova that essentially we're talking about 16 persons who employed as teachers, of which only 6 hold teaching degree. And without saying what the qualification or what the quality of these people are as teachers, it's also a fact that they are closely affiliated for family or other reasons to in this case, the principal. So the new physical education teacher, this quote says, is the son of the school director. He's a lawyer, but he's on the payroll. And then also we have a quote about the wife, a mathematics teacher who was employed as a full librarian and was appointed as instructor in the cook group. Now, these quotes and the research itself does not tell you exactly how much of this is happening. So we're not saying which schools these are. We're also not saying how intensive this is or how prevalent. However, if you look also at the vulnerabilities we have identified, which can explain these practices, it becomes clear that we're most likely talking about systemic phenomena. So it's not something that happens in an isolated place once. It is something that is happening or could happen potentially across the system, just because the weaknesses that enable this one case that is quoted here, they are the same across the country or in many regions of the country. So yes, this is not a proof that we know that this is happening in 95% of the schools. We don't know about that, but we do know that this practice exists, and it is most likely not an isolated example. Some of the violations, some of the manifestations of these violations were rather country-specific. Again, an example from Moldova, where performance evaluations could be actually used or abused for different purposes, for example, for rewarding or punishing teachers. And you see there is this part of a quote say, well, the evaluation of teachers is very often a punishment tool. So this is something where, you know, if you are for whatever reason close to the principal, or if you are protected in whatever way, you probably will have a more favorable evaluation. And the other way around, you can also experience a negative evaluation ad hoc just because of something completely different that is perhaps not even related to the performance. In Georgia, we have also a few kind of more specific manifestations of evaluations. Have mock recruitments of teachers. I was struggling a little bit how to exactly name this, but essentially it is a situation in which it is kind of clear in advance who is going to get the job, and then you have different kind of symptoms of this situation. You might have a situation where the interview process is very formal, but lasts only a few minutes. So you have really, as a candidate, the feeling that, okay, this is kind of decided in advance, and whatever I say doesn't really matter. And also sometimes, you know, there were cases recorded in Georgia where actually the counterparts were saying, well, actually, you know, the candidate has already been chosen. So I have the situations also when you have interviews where several people take place at the same time, so they are having the interviews in parallel and all that. So this is like what we meant. These are the examples that fall here in the mock recruitment of teachers. And then the fifth is evergreen, if I may say so, when you have some sort of external, mostly undue influence on appointment decisions. And here somebody from Georgia, a candidate who obviously was not successful, shares, I know that I will not be hired because I do not have anyone to support me, but I'll try anyways. Maybe your committee is an exception. So this is a quote from the report in Georgia. Now, the more interesting discussion perhaps here is the one of why this is happening. So there are several reasons, really systemic policy-related reasons. The first one is that there are actually, you know, teacher shortages, which are due to this balance in the way resources or places and the school network is being planned. So there are gaps in planning. And these shortages can also be due to unattractive working conditions. Nothing really radically new there, as you see, but let's maybe just mention these two things separately. If it comes to the gaps in planning, the idea here is that in fact there is a problem with the distribution of the teaching workforce across the education system. For example, in Moldova, primary and especially secondary schools are struggling with teacher shortages, and this is somehow also depends on the geographical location. For example, while in rural areas where and disadvantaged areas in rural areas where you know, young graduates don't really want to go, so most people want to be in the cities. You might have teacher shortages because simply people don't want to go to teach there. While in urban places where you have a concentration of students, an influx of students, so due to internal migration, you might have teacher shortages just because you know, there are too many students who want to study in the same school. Of course, there are a lot of variations here, so it's not that precise to generalize in this way because there are different types of schools and different types of scenarios depending on the size of the city. But it's a typical example of how I mean, see in this graph, it's also presented how, in fact, the teacher-student ratios have been growing over the past few years in the country, just because, in fact, the number of students per teacher is getting bigger because the adjustment in the capacity, the adjustment in the number of professionals which are in the system does not necessarily follow the demographic trends with the same speed, and also the amount of students that are in different places, this doesn't reflect necessarily in the way the teaching capacity is being planned. We also have an example here specifically from the national report, which notes that although the number of students in urban area surpasses the number of students in rural areas, rural schools continue to outnumber the schools in the cities by a factor of 3. So it's really a matter of how really the school network is being planned. And in Georgia, we have a similar situation where the challenge there is rather that 70% of the schools are small scale schools. So you have overall, if you look at the aggregate numbers, it looks like there's really an abundance of teachers. However, there is really a deficit of teachers in certain regions and disciplines. So you have this kind of large variance in the student-teacher ratio between school location type and the number of students. So the planning of where teachers go, what places and what schools have teacher places and which ones are struggling. So the response, the policy response to these developments is not necessarily reflecting the facts on the ground. The other shortages about unattractive working conditions, of course, we need to mention wages here. This is again an evergreen, but in fact, if you look even further, it is interesting to see that it's not only about wages, it's about a complex of conditions of employment, which in some cases could even be qualified as precarious working conditions, either because in addition to the low pay, you have situations where there is a certain job uncertainty. There might also be also this kind of a feeling that you're exposed to the arbitrariness of decisions when it comes to your career as a teacher, and so on and so on. So you have really the problem that the working conditions make the teaching profession unattractive, which again leads to a number of justifications of why, if there are no candidates for a job as a teacher, you are actually permitted to go for less qualified candidates, to hire people who are at hand, no matter whether they are the right ones or not. And this can go as far as actually abandoning or breaking the rules that are in place around recruitment. There are also another set of problems. I'm going to rush through that because I'm aware that I might be approaching the limit of the time. We also have a problem with missing or unworkable procedural requirements. Specifically, for example, in Moldova, although there is a clear commitment to creating a competitive environment for hiring teachers, so teachers should be hired on the basis of a competition, there is still no properly defined procedure. There's this discussion about a methodology which will be uniform across the country. The Ministry of Education is promising at the time when we were completing this report, this methodology was still in place. So essentially, all decisions regarding recruitment, regarding who is getting the job as a teacher, are really left to the discretion of the school principals, who are in turn susceptible, of course, to all kinds of pressures, because they have to run a school, and that's not an easy task. On the other extreme, you have the recent staffing reform in Georgia, where there is really not a problem of lack of regulations and clarity about how things should be done. The problem is that for the most schools, due to the latest wave of reforms in this area, really the time frame which was allocated for compliance, for implementing these rules and procedures was simply too short. In fact, as we note here in the report, it looks like it was frankly impossible to observe, which provided schools with an excuse to, in fact, disregard some of these rules if necessary, because simply it was not possible to comply with them just because of the short time available. There is also the problem of inadequate recruitment criteria. Here again, the two countries are kind of very different, but the problem is they're all the same. In Moldova, you have a situation where the criteria are rather generic. So essentially, although there's a commitment to competition, like what I mentioned, is that we were not aware that teaching candidates undergo any kind of testing or verification of what exactly they know or they don't know. And also the way the criteria defined was rather, like I said, generic. On the other hand, in Georgia, the problem is not that they're generic; they're rather more generous because of these difficulties to find teachers and because of the time pressure. In 2019, the authorities have lowered the bar. So essentially, the qualification requirements for new teachers were lowered. They were made more generous, which actually allows also for candidates which perhaps are less qualified to get a job, which of course in some cases has led to the hiring of people who are actually not qualified at all. And the justification is, yes, we have teacher shortage. We are allowed to somehow go for lower than necessary, and that's why we hire people who are less qualified and perhaps also people who are affiliated in some way, politically or family relationships, and so on and so on. Here too, we are not making statements about how much this is happening or how prevalent it is. We're just pointing towards specific systemic weakness, which should be addressed from an integrity point of view. I forgot to mention these quotes from Georgia, which were an example of how the procedural requirements are unworkable because of the time. Anyway, the other 2 points here, the other 2 weaknesses which promote favoritism in both countries, that favoritism is not properly defined as an offense in education. So, you have a lot of conflict of interest and integrity rules that cover the civil service and sometimes public employees. But this is less clear whether this really covers teachers who are, of course, on the public payroll but all these mechanisms that are there to prevent integrity violations in the public sector, it is less clear whether they're applicable really to people who are in the teaching profession and to principals. And last but not least, there is a certain level of distrust in the formal credentials of candidates for teaching. So essentially, no matter what papers you come with, there is a tendency to think that perhaps we should check you extra, or perhaps if you come recommended from another school or from a friend, this is like even better. And this is like a very interesting thing. If you look at how the quality is being assured of teachers in both countries, and here we have these different dimensions that the OECD TALIS survey covers as an example of the diversity of dimensions that can be covered when it comes to the appraisal of teachers and so on. You see that in fact Georgia and Moldova are not that far away. In both cases, you know, it's a very diversified set of criteria, of things that are being looked at when deciding whether teachers are good or not. But it looks like that the problem is that these criteria, the quality assurance when it comes to teachers, the evaluation of teaching performance, is being done rather for compliance purposes, not so much for improvement. So it's more of a summative goal there, and which again means that in fact, if you want to trust the results of teacher evaluations in order to hire someone, you have a reason actually to distrust them. So this is one more reason why, in fact, people resort to favoritism very often. Rafaela, I know that now I hit the mark of 12:31 or something like that. How much time will you give me to finish this? I know we want to have half an hour and then a discussion, just to know how quickly I should rush through the other slides. I have a few more, just wanted to mention a few things about misappropriation, and then perhaps, you know, what we have seen across the countries in terms of...
Go ahead. 5 to 7 minutes, would be that enough?
Yes, I always tend to say yes, and then, oh my God, around the 8 minutes, I'll look at you and kind of say, can I have 1 more minute, please? But okay, yes, okay, I'll try to finish 7 minutes, so that we really have time for discussion, if there are any questions. Thanks a lot. Okay. Now, the next thing is misappropriation of funds, specifically of parental contributions in Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan. I'll rush you through it without going into too much detail, but one thing that must be mentioned is that actually parental donations as such, as direct integrity violations, they're not violations in any of the countries. In fact, in both countries, they are permissible under certain conditions. What is more problematic is that parental donations are being abused in many instances to facilitate or for the purpose of other integrity violations. And you see here an overview of how this initial list of integrity violations that I showed you, the 9, we have in Kyrgyzstan several cases where the parental donations are in fact promoting illicit conduct, like illicit provision of denial of access to education, politicization, under-recognition of student achievement, favoritism, and so on and so on. We have slightly less evidence about some of these violations in Mongolia, but nevertheless, we do have evidence that, yes, there too, parental donations are facilitating illicit access, proper private supplementary tutoring services, and so on and so on. If we go a little bit more into the detail of that, indeed, the abuse or use of donations is kind of a formal, semi-formal precondition for access to education. Is really quite widespread. You see here there's a graph from Mongolia that really, if you look at the references, the number of mentions in the transcripts about how often actually donations being given for admission to another class within the school or to another school, this is really like the most common reason for that. And also we have the examples from Kyrgyzstan, where of course parents would not necessarily say yes, we did bribe, and principals would never admit that, but there are examples about others, what others do. So you have here like there are quotes that yes, you have to pay this amount for enrollment and that amount for that. So essentially the interesting thing about this phenomenon about the abuse of donations for in exchange for access is that really in the very seldom this is like a direct sort of, I give you the money and you give me access. It's kind of more sophisticated than that. So the parental donations allow really for packaging the transaction in a way where it's not immediately clear, is this really something that was given in exchange for access, or is it something that is given for another purpose? And one of the positive side effects is that, yes, I increase the chances of my kid to get to school. So the forms, the packaging of this transaction can be really very diverse. It could be in the form of commitment to contribute over the course of the education of a child. It could be a one-off thing. It could be participation in certain initiatives where you need to donate in order to make these initiatives possible. So there really are different formats. And also this quote from Mongolia gives you an idea of how kind of complex this could actually be, and how it really requires there's no one size fits all explanation of how this is happening. The second manifestation is when you actually give direct donations to teachers in exchange for access. In Mongolia, for example, parents are being kind of coerced, let's say it that way, to donate for additional services provided by school teachers in daycare centers after the very short school days is over, and in Kyrgyzstan, I'm just looking for the example of Kyrgyzstan. Yes, is this quote here that obviously it's not that easy to find proof or evidence or readiness to make statements that if you donate you're going to secure a better grade for the child, but you have a lot of kind of a negative sort of evidence in which there are a lot of stories about complaints that the children are being treated unequally in case they come from families who do not pay the requested parental donations. Yes, again, here donations facilitate undue recognition of student achievement. And I don't even know how to call this, frankly, the better treatment of students. It's a double standard. Essentially, it's a promotion of a double standard, which is facilitated, encouraged through the parental donations. Then, of course, we have two more, which are slightly more country specific. It is one is really fascinating. Actually, both are fascinating in some way, but for different reasons. So the one from Kyrgyzstan is fascinating because it is essentially the abuse of parental donations as a vehicle for favoritism. So parental donations are really a hotly debated topic in the country, and sometimes under the pretext of fighting the integrity problems around parental donations, it could be that principals of certain schools, usually more attractive schools, which are richer, are being accused of doing something wrong with the parental donations. And then the wish to address the problem is being abused as an excuse to, in fact, try and replace school leadership and install people who are, I don't know, affiliated on political grounds, on whatever. So you have this kind of a use of parental contributions for political ends. So this is really a fascinating example of how, by trying to actually solve the problem or pretending you're solving the problem, you're actually promoting it. Then in Mongolia, it is fascinating for another reason. It's fascinating because it's really, frankly, very blunt. So there is no particular sophistication to what is going on there in these examples. You have cases in which you have material goods purchased with parental donations, and then they just disappear. So the teacher leaves the school and takes them with him or her. So we have a quote here like that. And the other blunt example is where you have parents donate, there is no reporting back, and nothing happens. So nothing's being purchased. It's not really obvious what happened with the money. The money is just there or not, but there is nothing that comes back in exchange. So these are the manifestations of this particular violation, the way parental donations are being abused. And then we have, of course, again, the probably more interesting discussion about the policy vulnerabilities that lead to that. One of them is well, nothing new there. Again, perhaps there are, of course, shortages due to inefficient allocation of resources. These shortages create really a genuine demand for support by parents. There's really nothing new there. What is probably more interesting is that, in fact, it's not so much about the aggregate amounts or the share of the public budget allocated to education. It is also about the inefficient distribution of resources which are already available. One is that in some cases, like in Mongolia, for example, school managers do not necessarily have the freedom to distribute the resources they have in the way that will address the needs of the school best. There is per capita funding, but the baseline, the formula, the amounts allocated in that formula have not been revised for a while, so they don't really reflect the changing market conditions. So essentially, the formula leads to allocations which are insufficient. And also in Kyrgyzstan, if you look at that, we have really quite a substantial contribution, like proportionately, to education in terms of financial resources. The biggest amount of this, over 90%, goes to salaries. At the same time, salaries of teachers in Kyrgyzstan are really still very, very low in comparison. So essentially, this suggests that it's not only about the amount of money, but they're probably being spread very thinly about a very large number of teachers in the system. So I'm not talking about teacher shortages or teacher reductions in any way. I'm just kind of suggesting that the question of efficiency of distribution of available resources, available public resources, just as important as discussion about the shortage of resources. So this is one of the reasons why parental donations are really necessary. The other is that although the role of private investment in public education in these two countries, and frankly across Eastern Europe, is growing for years now, to an extent where schools cannot actually operate without this kind of a private investment from the side. Most of it comes in the form of parental donations. There's still the problems with the regulations which regulate sort of the way parental donations are being used. Specifically, there are in Mongolia, for example, the national reports discusses that there are no proper monitoring mechanisms to verify compliance with all the rules that are in place. And also, the reporting obligations of principals of how the donations are being used only partial. Teachers are supposed to report on how they use the donations, but this was in a really difficult situation because they're between the parents and the school leadership. And whereas in Kyrgyzstan, for example, you have really rules that say that parental donations should go to the state treasury and so on and so on, but at the same time, if money would go through the state treasury, this will make it very difficult for the schools to use this money flexibly. So in most cases, school kind of run the parental donation affairs through the accounts of NGOs, which are not connected officially to the school. So in this way, all of these regulations that are in place to regulate how parental donations are being used, monitored, and so on, don't really apply, because these are entities which are outside of the education system. Although they are created to support the education system, these parental NGOs are actually outside. And so in this way, they're not necessarily subject to the same accountability arrangements that are in place. So this is like the second and the final one, the final area of vulnerability. There's some more kind of a sector-specific things, which range from the fact that there's really a large variance in school quality, which creates perceptions, this is now Kyrgyzstan, which creates perceptions that some schools are really much better than others, and creates an incentive for parents to look for all kinds of ways to get their children to this specific school. We don't really know whether the school is really better or not, because there are no objective criteria for that, and this is combined with gaps in the admission procedures, really creates a situation where donations, yes, can buy you a place in the school you want. On the other side, when it comes to this illicit provision or denial of access to education, in Mongolia, you have enrollment capacity shortages because the planning of the school network is politicized. So essentially, schools are being opened in accordance with the promises of parliamentarians and not so much in accordance with genuine need. And also, the school day is so short that you really need to find a way to sort of have additional services to keep the child in the school for a bit longer, especially if you're full-time employed and so on, which again really creates a good reason for parents to donate directly to teachers for this kind of extra services to compensate for these gaps. And there are a number of other weaknesses around the other violations which are being facilitated with parental donations, like gaps in classroom assessment in both countries, resource shortages, and also gaps in the recruitment procedures and problems with the reporting obligations and the use of donations, lack of written records, and so on and so on. Just 2 words about commonalities, which are very important. All of these policy shortcomings emerge in the context of long-term large-scale reforms. So although I'm far from blaming the reforms for the problems, it is a fact that in some cases, it is quite obvious that something in the way these reforms were designed and implemented really contributes to the gaps which facilitate integrity problems. In the other way around, if you look at integrity problems, you are able, and this is what this research shows, you're able to identify which are these gaps. You're able to retrace them and understand that perhaps in some cases having reforms and good intentions is really not enough. You have scenarios of partial implementation, disruption and missed targets, and poor planning and design in all countries, which really explain to a large extent the gaps that create the integrity risks and actually promote integrity violations in both countries. This is a summary of these kind of policy weaknesses, which can be traced back to incomplete or imperfect reform design and implementation. Nothing new here again. There are problems in the area of financing in the form of shortage of public funding, heavy reliance on private support without proper accountability, rigidity of public budget management, and also inefficiency in the resource allocation. There are gaps in teacher policy. You can see it here as well. We discussed this. I'm not going to dwell on that. There are problems in the quality assurance, like classroom assessment mechanisms, and also the way actually control works. We didn't mention this too much in the presentation. And then, of course, the substandard quality of education. So this holds across the board of countries. And finally, of course, the report has several recommendations, which you can see also in the summary. It's about addressing the resource shortages. It's about investing in trust-building measures with our quality assurance reforms, because we think that this will take away a little bit the pressure or the impression, the conviction of people that they must resort to illicit conduct in order to get what they need. It's about increasing also autonomy, the autonomy of providers in exchange for greater accountability, because very often it's true that principals do know how to best use their resources, but they can't do it in that way without cheating. It's about depoliticization of decision-making processes through greater involvement of the public and the media specifically. The 5th recommendation is, an improvement of conflict of interest regulations to address all instances of shadow provision, which are being promoted through parental donations mostly. There's nothing about whistleblowers, frankly, so we don't see much in terms of encouraging and protecting whistleblowers. And these reports would not have been possible without the willingness of people to share. So it's not about disclosing who you are and who did something wrong. It's about creating an environment which facilitates frank exchange of experiences and insights so that we all know what to do. The 7th recommendation is about strengthening participation in the governance mechanisms. This is, again, nothing new. This has been also repeated in the research that NEPC has previously supported. And finally, it's about the promotion of a culture of integrity on the level of education providers. If you want to know more about that, Moldova has a good experience in promoting this priority, and we thought it's really something that is important enough to be recommended for all countries. This is all I have to say. I skipped over one slide, but I'm going to leave it as a mystery on the screen while we're taking some questions. I guess this is the next stage. As our questions, I see there are 29 comments in the chat. I haven't seen any of them. I hope they're not all, oh my God, stop talking. Stop talking, enough. Thank you, bye.
Thank you, Michaela, for this presentation that really reminded us how important it is to connect the things and how deeply rooted some issues are in education. Yeah, it's a very complex topic. Yeah, 29 messages in the chat. We have some very active participants from Moldova, I guess. And most of them are actually more comments than questions regarding the situation in Moldova and how some of the practices are more connected to larger cities than to rural areas, and how one of the problem in such small countries with small communities may be families connections and so on. But we also have some questions for you, and I guess also for everybody, because I can see now some very familiar faces in our audience. So we can open the discussion. Just give me some time to go through the questions. So I have first one question.
Just that we also have Olya here, who could not join us from the beginning because her students did not let her go. She's very popular, also in her university, so she's here too. So
I also hi Olya.
You can also answer questions if you have any. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. So I have one general questions. I don't know. I mean, I will put it, and then maybe you, Mikhail, Olya, or some of our project partners can address it. And then I have some more specific questions for the national partners. For my first question that I received here is regarding the role of parents in integrity violations. So how it's possible that parents accept to somehow pay twice for education, and what do you think they should do about it? It's very complicated questions, I guess. I don't know who wants to address it. Mikhailo.
In trying to address this question also I see some of the colleagues from the countries here. Perhaps you have an insight. I want to say that if I'm a parent, well, I am a parent, I know that certain things I have a choice, to fight the fight or to get things done to the benefit of my child. Well, I probably will think twice, and in most people cases, we just go for making things happen for that child. So this is like we're talking really about a routine of solving problems in a certain way, and then sometimes I think people don't even notice that this routine could be remodeled to work in a different way, where it will be cheaper and more effective to actually do things in the legal way. But parents alone cannot do that. You really need everybody who is involved to do their part. But I'm just trying to say it's not enough to tell, oh, this is bad. People who do that, they really have very good reasons to do that, to resort all kinds of solutions.
Yeah, that's why it's important to understand the roots of the problem, and then we can address the real issue before it comes to integrity violations. Okay.
Yeah.
Olya, go ahead.
Just to know
Hi,
what Mikhailo has. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Yeah, just to continue what Mikhailo has already said, if we even look from the rational choice theory perspective, people usually have some kind of rational choices or make some kind of rational choices. So parents are motivated to do the best for their child. And the most cost-effective action in this case seems to be engagement in some kind of integrity risky behavior. Therefore, we just have to think about, as Mikhailo already said, it's not just about the parent, it is also about offering alternatives to the parents to engage in different kinds of activity that at the same time lead to the goal they have in education for their child.
Yeah, above all, when we talk about the parental contribution in education, some of the education system cannot function without them. So the issue is very, very, very complex. We have another questions regarding the dissemination at country level. I know that some of our project partners are very active in disseminating these results at the national level. Above all, our partners from Moldova and Georgia, while the Mongolian and the Kyrgyzstan one have just started together with the synthesis report. So maybe you would like to share some of the reactions for the dissemination of these country results, and if you have any idea about the further step. I don't know if Georgi from the Institute for Education Policy Planning and Management from Georgia, or Viorica, or Patya.
Can I add something to the previous question?
Yes, go ahead, Patya, go ahead. Patya is from the Mongolian Education Alliance from Mongolia. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say that this opens to another level of discussion where what free means in education, and how it is defined, and also at the other level. In our case, parental donations are acceptable if it is voluntary. But whether it is voluntary and how it is defined, what are the regulations, how it is monitored, etc., and whether all parents are voluntarily donating. These are the questions that comes together when you talk about why parents have to pay. When the education, especially compulsory education, is said in the Constitution that it is free. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you, Batya. That's why this kind of study is a kind of first step exploratory phase to see which kind of next steps we can take. Thank you. Georgi or Viorica would like to share something about the public reaction to your dissemination of the national reports. As I said in the chat, the synthesis report is available on NEP's website, as well as the Moldovan and Georgian one national report are available on our website. Georgi, I see your microphone on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Nice to see you again, safe and healthy. We are very pleased to participate in this. I can say the very successful project, and I would like to thank all our colleagues, all our friends from country teams, from integrity, from international team, international experts, and of course, NEP's team, Rafaela, Lana. Thank you for very good opportunity to participate in this project. Concerning the dissemination activities, we already conducted the few activities to disseminate the results of our project. Series of presentations of discussions we conducted with main stakeholders here in country. It provoked huge interest, and we disseminate these results through mass and social media, and we are going to continue our efforts to disseminate the results. In next weeks, we are going to translate and publish synthesis report in national language. We hope that as a national report, this report also would be extremely interesting to our audience and education community as well. So also next step would be, we think about the continuation of this topic. I mean the violation of integrity. So, and choose other topics, not only the teachers recruitment, but other ones as well. And think about the new projects in our country. We will contact you, of course, you, Mihailo, Lana, and previously we'll discuss these issues with you. So it's in general our plans for the future. And the situation would be okay.
Yeah, we hope so. We try to stay positive for the future. Thank you, Georgi, for sharing some of the dissemination insights. I don't know if Viorica has something to add. I know that you had a very ambitious plan regarding the dissemination. If you would like to share some of the reaction from the public. Yeah. Oh, now your mic. You have your mic off.
But
yeah, now it's working.
Thank you, Rafaela. Thank you, dear colleagues. It was a great opportunity for us to participate in this project and to do this research. And my colleague Oksana Dragutsa maybe also will share some opinions about our process and our results. We disseminated during a lot of activities at a high level our results, and but unfortunately all were online activities. And maybe I think if we will have the possibility to discuss offline, and we will have other possibility to see reactions of our funcționari publici, how to say, our managers, public workers, and the general opinion, because I presented the results of study at Ministry of Education twice, and general opinion of our directors of regional departments of education was that in education now we don't have such big problems on integrity aspects, because we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough because of demographical crisis, we don't have enough students or not enough. We have very big problems with because a lot of schools are closed, and a lot of my colleagues compare the situation in education with the situation in political level, in economics, and that's why they don't recognize this as integrity as a big problem. But when we presented some details, they recognize that yes, at institutional level we have such problems, and they appreciated a lot our examples, because in general these examples were known at national level, but a lot of political or decision makers didn't prefer to discuss this topic. And we will continue to disseminate the results of our study. Last week, another NEPS project, we have the topic on integrity topic during the discussion club for teacher FIDEA, and also one of our colleagues, school principal, proposed some aspects in integrity problem to discuss with teachers, and there are a lot of links with our study. And probably after the publication in Romanian language, the synthesis, we will have other opportunities to disseminate the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Viorica. It is indeed a sensitive topic everywhere.
I forgot to add about the reaction of the audience.
Sorry, Georgi, I didn't hear you. Can you repeat your comment?
I forgot to mention the reaction of the audience.
Reactions.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, okay. The reaction from the main audience, main stakeholders, I mean the academic community, teachers, principals of the schools, experts, and NGO representatives, it was very positive. Very positive. They agreed with the main findings in the study and underlined the main our recommendations. And but reaction from the ministry was some kind of cautious and careful. They did not argued, but they received it as it was. Yeah, but it was very interesting case, particularly social media very actively used our findings, and they used our recommendation to disseminate the information and about the situation in this regard. I mean, the in teachers recruitment policies. So I think it was quite successful. Yeah, for the dissemination point of view and the dissemination of our findings results. So we can continue. We will add now synthesis report. It would be also interesting for our community to compare with Moldova, with other countries participated in the project, the results, and I think it would be also successful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Georgi, for your additions. Yeah, it is indeed a sensitive topic, and sometimes we have to first work on raising awareness about certain practices and then to plan further steps. I don't see any more comments or questions in the chat. I don't know if, okay, I can see now the mic from Nina on. So
Rafaela, yes, we wanted to add. Do you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
We wanted to add something. We haven't started yet. We haven't started the dissemination, but in narrow circle of researchers, we share our results. And actually, as you probably know, we have some huge political changes in our country, and we have a new Ministry of Education. And actually, this new ministry staff, they initiated the new research that our foundation and partner organization NET just finished. It's about the transformation of parental contributions into something official, into kind of official payments like co-share or co-payment from parents to the budget money that should be stable and should be counted on the personal demands, like per capita payments for each student. And we just finished this research, and Onola was Umankulova was the, I don't see her now, but she was during our discussion with us. She was our partner, we did it together. So we are looking with optimism into our situation. Probably something will change quite soon. And also we see that it's very important topic that will be extremely important in the nearest future. So we think that dissemination process in our case will be very, very successful, and a lot of people will be involved into that, because it's again, this topic is again in the center of political discussions.
Thank you, Nina. This is really some kind of huge change moment in this issue now in Kyrgyzstan. We have another comment now from Kate. This is a such political moment in the region, yes, in Moldova and Kyrgyzstan. Maybe there are new opportunities for collective actions. I was hoping to get the question of how the results will come back to the research participants, the parents, students, who responded to who participated in the research. So is there any possibility to link them with each other? So maybe if you just can quickly share if the participants in the research were involved in the dissemination plan. I know that something like that was done in Moldova. I don't know if the other can share. So if you involved in your dissemination plan the participants from the research. Your mic are off. So if you want to share something, you have to put your mic on. I can see Nina speaking, but I'm not sure she's speaking with me or with us.
Can I say a few words about
Batya, go ahead.
Our plans and also what's happening in the politics, education policy. So we had, even though we haven't officially started dissemination, we had to rush into advocacy, because this year we had parliamentary elections, and we in March, together with the other civil society organizations as a coalition, we developed policy asks from the political parties who are going to run for the elections. And policy asks in education, and it included quite a significant part on education financing. Because for us, one of the reasons the parental donations are significant is how schools are funded, how much they are funded. So that was, and after the elections were done, when the new Minister of Education was appointed, we also sent it again to the party, to the winning party, and to the minister, again, the policy asks. And I think there are two main gains. There is a process of changing the education law, the whole education law package. And at the moment, what you call, it's something similar to the concept note of the proposal. So the concept note of the education law is released. It's approved by the parliament, and the ministry recently introduced what they are proposing in the new law. In terms of education financing, they are proposing to include at least 20% of national budget to be allocated for education. And also in the current law, there is a saying that the donations or fees that are allowed by the law, and it's description, and they are saying that this will be defined well, so that what kind of payment or donation or fees are going to be allowed or not. So this is first, and second, in the Mihaila's presentation, there was something about the per student funding formula. So the minister, when we had a meeting as a coalition with the minister said that the ministry is going to set up a working group to change the funding formula, so that student-related specifications, it becomes more sensitive to different needs of students and schools in different situations. So I think these are some of the gains, and we know that we need to do a lot once we translate the synthesis report and publish it together with the national report and disseminate. So we have some gains, but we still need to concretize some of the issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Batya. Thank you, Batya. I really think that this the coalition is doing really an amazing job in Mongolia regarding the role of education and in general when it comes to advocacy. So thank you for sharing this. Violik, I see your microphone on. Maybe you want to share something else? Go ahead.
Just 2-3 sentences related the dissemination our study to the persons involved in our research, because of COVID, we sent by email special letter to all the participants in our focus group discussions, and also to the participants involved in in-depth interviews. I also sent to my master students from university who were involved in the focus group discussions, and they presented the study in their institutions, and the reactions were very positive. But I had some cases when my master students, after this research, they understood that PRO Didactica can help them to solve some problems related to the recruitment, or to approach some official person in Ministry of Education. And during 1 or 2 months ago, I helped my students to solve problems with Ministry of Education, because even officially our ministry workers did not recognize this problem as a huge, very big problem. My colleagues present here, because we have 2 participants in our focus group, Daniela Vakarchuk, school principal, and Anna Vivdic is ex-chief of his general inspectorate, for teachers in Moldova. We have this problem, but it's not such discussed, public recognized, My colleagues can tell some opinions from their point of view.
Thank you,
Anna,
Viorica. We are now running late because we have 20 minutes late. I'm sorry, but you know, I somehow it felt that the discussion went on, and so we didn't want to stop. Of course, also in the network, we are discussing how to connect this project to other results and to our future plans, because we have to networking things at many different levels, so at the project levels also. Thank you all for participating and for sharing your perspectives. Thank you in particular to our project partners for taking this very important topic in their education system. This is, I mean, you really were very courageous to do that. Thank you to Kate as representative of Open Society Foundations for joining us. And of course to Mihailo and Olya for sharing their reports. Thank you everybody for participating, and I mean, we will have some more chance, of course, in the future to share, and I will hope, and we do hope that we'll have the chance to share about these reports at the next NEPC event in April lively, not online. So thank you everybody once again. Thank you for participating. The report is available on the website, and the webinar will also be online soon. Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.